Hello, this is Debi Mathias, Director of the QRIS National Learning Network with the BUILD Initiative. I'd like to welcome all of you here today. It's so great to have everybody on this webinar, and we're very excited about the beginning of our monthly Let's Talk series. The idea for the Let's Talk series came from many of you who have been sending such great suggestions, posing great questions, and grappling with issues. And we're providing this ongoing series as a forum for discussion about issues, innovations, what people are trying, what's working, and a place where in a smaller group than a large email blast webinar, we can have a chance to focus in on the work states are doing around quality building and think specifically about unique and topics that are of interest to us. A few mechanics, and then we'll talk more about that. You can raise your hand or use the chat box to interject questions. Typically the format's going to be, we'll have a presenter introduce a concept and tell us a story about what's going on and an innovative practice or a challenge they're facing, and then we'll have an opportunity after about a half hour, 45 minutes, to really engage in a deeper discussion about the topic. So I really encourage you to have a piece of paper handy, take notes as we move through the presentation, because we are going to come back to an open dialogue where we hope to engage many of you in thoughtful discussion and probing deeper with the speakers and presenters about their expertise and ideas they may have or challenges we're facing, and be able to pick their brains about how they relate to the issues and topics that you're facing. The Let's Talk series is the content of the webinar series is going to be given to the lead person in the QRIS monthly, and they'll be able to triage it within their state to folks where the topic may be germane to their work, or where they want a small group to hear about this as a seed for a discussion that you can take back later to work on within your state. And it's an eclectic assortment of topics and items that we'll be working on, so it's not like a same team cadre might be appropriate for each one of the sessions. So we're going to ask that the state quality leads carefully consider who they're inviting and get the right people to the table for the conversation. We are going to post the PowerPoints, and in this case we're going to have some associated handouts and documents available for folks on the QRIS National Learning Network website under the webinar section, but we're not going to be posting the audios for these Let's Talk series, because we're really hoping that it's a time where we can create a safe space for some candid discussion, for sharing provocative questions with each other and really digging deeper, and we're going to keep that between the folks that were on the call and we're able to make it. But we do want to make the resources available to other team members and so forth, so we will have those materials available for everyone. There will be a survey coming out after this webinar. Right away when you close out, you'll see a survey, and please help us by filling it out and providing feedback. And if you have ideas for topics that you think are of interest or challenging within your state, please reach out to me, and we can look to get some experts or leading thinkers about that topic. We can bring them into the webinar and have them facilitate us through a discussion. So in the long run, we're hoping that the topics for this series are actually driven from all of you, even though these have, I've kind of picked out the ones I've heard along the way. But I'm very interested in having states present their work or promising practice or what they're grappling with and how they got to a place or pose questions. So we're very interested in innovation on this. Other topics we've been thinking about so far are public engagement, creating broad awareness and support for quality and the QRIS work within states, maybe accreditation as part of QRIS in the continuum of quality, how accreditation projects inform the work within quality in the states, the relationship of licensing to the QRIS work, the relationship of child care subsidies to the state quality work, infant toddlers in QRIS, school aid considerations. Those are some of the ideas that have been floating around, and we have a few more coming up. So we'll ask for any ideas and input and really appreciate if you take a moment. Megan has posted on the screen how to mute your phone and unmute your phone. And if you need any help, send us a message and we'll reach out to you. Now on to the topic for today's Let's Talk series about communities of practice. It kind of was serendipity that this topic actually happens to be our first topic in the Let's Talk series. As we work nationally with all of the spotlight on early childhood quality of experiences for young children and our work together to really improve the experiences of young children, we've been thinking how to transcend it, move beyond the monitoring and accountability sectors to really work to enhance the outcomes for children, outcomes for programs and practitioners and families, and really improve children's early learning experiences so they're more prepared for school and life and do well. This topic today, as we begin to set up a strong national learning community between learning tables, webinars, the Let's Talk series, our work together at meetings and with other like-minded groups, and we begin to set up a community where we can honestly and straightforwardly share ideas and innovation and actually need each other so that we don't keep within our states recreating the wheel, but can leverage the work going on so rapidly across the country between us. We can leverage that work and move along more quickly. I always think about that 2-year-old sitting in an early learning, child care classroom, high quality classroom, and they can't wait for us. They need us to get better now and as quick as we can for them. And as we create this community of practice, as I said, I happen to get connected with Pete and Sarah and their work in North Carolina and Florida, and got very excited about it as we look to create the framework of the quality work that surrounds the rating and monitoring and accountability work. So we can rate the programs. We know what the quality levels are. We're getting more sophisticated in our uses of research-based methodology to measure all these things. But how do we actually help programs improve their quality? How do we help directors and people supporting the implementation of quality within the state set up systems where they can improve their practice? And I think that Pete and Sarah have some good ideas to share with us today about some of the thinking around the use of communities of practice to do just this important work. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce you to Pete Bermudez. He provides professional development for the Lassinger Center of the University of Florida and works locally with states and has national partners. He designs and facilitates a variety of professional development experiences focused on growing and sustaining communities of practice, leading for equity, and project-based learning. And the rest of his bio is posted with the webinar, and I want to give him as much time as possible. So, Pete, I'd like to turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Before I plunge into this topic, I want to thank all of you for being on the webinar. I'm excited to share the work that we've done around communities of practice, and I want to provide a brief moment for Sarah and another colleague of mine who's joined me today. Sarah Smith has worked with me or rather I have supported her work in building an online community of practice. And the second person that's joining me today is Ana Pisano, who has been an instrumental partner in Miami in actually implementing communities of practice for practitioners. So I would like for them to briefly introduce themselves to you, and then we'll get started.
Hello, this is Sarah, and I'm thrilled to be here today and share some of the work that we've been doing here in North Carolina and with Pete's support, and sort of give some examples, and hopefully in the next session have a chance to sort of give you some food for thought about how the work that we've done might support what you might want to do, and then also maybe you could use some of the work and not have to reinvent a wheel. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited that you've chosen to spend time with us today.
Hi, this is Ana Pisano, and I'm also very excited to be here and to share my experience in Miami working with early learning practitioners. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay. So I've been very lucky to do this work with Pete's support, and we feel that we've had some success, and it's just very exciting to be able to share how through this work we've been able to improve practices for early learning children through the work with curriculum learning communities in Miami.
Thank you, Ana. So let's get started. I want to second Debi's comments earlier to keep some paper and pencil handy so that when you hear something that strikes you or that you want to go back to or you want to respond to, that you can just keep track of that as we go through the webinar. I would say in the course of the webinar, we're going to try to do three things. The first of which is going to be to explore the concept of communities of practice as pretty much from a practitioner level, from the level that I have gotten to understand the work. So I don't come to you as like the guru or the expert, but rather here's how I have experienced it on the ground level in many of the different contexts that I've been lucky enough to work in. So that's one of the things we're going to do. The second thing we're going to do is hopefully engage you in a conversation after we sort of put out that content for you and get an idea of how you respond to that and what kinds of things resonated for you. And then finally, the third thing that we hope happens is, as you know, this is part one of a two-part series. So the last part, the third part of the work that we do is going to serve to bridge the work that we do in part one to the work that we will do in the next session, was really to give you a feel for how people are using the concept of communities of practice in an online setting, linking a state network of people working in early childhood. So let's get started. One of the things that I noticed in the title that went out to you on the email was it was framed as establishing a community of practice as a promising structure for continuous quality improvement efforts. So I wanted to comment on that. I also see that as that idea of a structure. I see the communities of practice process really as providing that kind of structure. And I tend to look at it as a container, right? A container for us to come together in groups and really engage each other in conversations that matter to us, that are vital for our own professional work, and more importantly for outcomes for the kids that we serve. We tend to think of structure as part of two other elements that are really critical, one of which is process. So when we have a structure, we come together, but once we have people together, we need a set of processes, a set of tools that will enable us to make good use of the time afforded by the structures that we have. So that's also an important element to us. And the next one, too, the third one is what I would call conditions. So if you have structures that bring people together, but people don't feel safe and they don't feel respect for each other, or they don't trust each other, the work that we can do falls really quite short of what we need to do. So when we think of structure, we think of those elements coming together to support whatever content, whatever work needs to be done, but to do it in a much more collaborative and powerful way. When people come together this way, it builds a really powerful sense of what I would call lateral accountability. We do a lot of work trying to comply with accountability frameworks and our community of practice. When you have people like in this image that are coming together because they share a passion for the work that they do, they've gotten to trust each other, and they've gotten to create a structure that brings them together regularly. A new, really powerful form of lateral accountability is created that once you had, some of you I know have experienced this, more than half of you I think indicated that you had some experiences with the concept of communities of practice. This lateral accountability really forms a major part of the work that I want to emphasize. And so let's start with a definition. One way to define the concept is to use Etienne Wenger, who's probably one of the leading experts in the work of communities of practice. And he frames it as you see on your screen, as the communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do, and then they go about learning how to do it better by coming together and interacting regularly. Those three elements, I think, are at the core of almost everything that we're going to be talking about today. And just so that I can give you a sense of what he means, I wasn't able to ask Etienne to join us, but I could bring him in on a video. So let me play a very quick video for you that will give you a better sense of how he defines that process. So you probably will need to adjust your volume on your own computers and make sure that you can hear it clearly. I will, in the meantime, mute my own phone so you don't hear my sound, the sound of my computer interfering on yours. So here we go.
Hi, my name is Brantley Underhill, and I'm the Director of Practitioner Markets for the Project Management Institute. And I have a guest with me today, Dr. Etienne Wenger. Welcome, Etienne.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I guess my claim to fame, whatever you want to call that, is that I've done a lot of work in the field of communities of practice. I would say that my identity personally is as a social learning theorist, that I'm interested in theories of learning that take social connection as the focus of interest, and communities of practice is part of that, to understand the way that people organize the social world as a place where people can engage and learn.
We talked a little bit about communities of practice being a learning partnership between the members themselves.
Yeah.
How would you describe learning partnership?
Well, the reason we call this a community of practice is because if people are engaged in the same practice, then by sharing what they are experiencing and what they are learning, they can recognize each other as a partner. You see what I mean? It's like, oh, you too do that. Okay, then I'm interested in what was your experience on Monday? Because what you did is very likely to be relevant to me, because we are engaged in that similar practice. Whether we do it together or whether we do it in completely different settings, it doesn't matter. We can recognize each other as a practitioner, and that in that mutual recognition, there is a kind of almost like a learning contract that becomes established between us.
And I think I've read recently that people are more apt to go to another person to get experience, to find out an answer to a problem they've had recently, versus trying to find it through a book or a white paper. Do you find that true, and how could a community of practice serve that mission?
Well, all a community of practice does is that it establishes ongoing relationship among people who have the potential of helping each other when they need to. So a great value of belonging to a community of practice is that you have a ready set of people that you can turn to when you have a challenge. And the challenge then becomes kind of the curriculum of that learning partnership. See, so you bring it on, right, I have a project and it's not going well, what should I do with this and that? That becomes kind of a curriculum for the partnership. And you tell me what you experience, what you try, somebody else joins in and says, well, no, I tried that, but it doesn't really work in this circumstance, maybe you should try this. And in that conversation, all of a sudden, there's a lot of learning and knowledge sharing that is taking place, and sometimes even knowledge creation as people come up with new ideas.
For the community, the practice include tools such as discussion boards, file sharing, wikis, and blogs. So these types of tools will enable members to be able to create and share that knowledge about their daily experiences with one another.
That's right. I think that's a really important point, that those are tools for that learning partnership. They're not substitutes for that learning partnership. So a wiki is not a community of practice, but a wiki can be a very good tool for people who are engaged in that learning partnership to start producing some text together or something like this. And sometimes people confuse that a little bit. They call a discussion board a committee of practice. To me, that's tricky, because you think, oh, I just open a discussion board, and why is it that nothing is happening? If there's not an experience of a learning partnership, then the discussion board is not going to create that. But especially if you don't live in the same building, then having a discussion board enables you to experience that learning partnership at a distance with people who are all around the world.
Okay, so one of the things that you heard him say in that video clip, it had something to do with the notion that you're having a challenge. As he framed it, I have a project and it's not going well. And then he said something I think is very critical to understanding the potential of a community of practice, which is the challenges that we face in our work serves as the curriculum for a community of practice. So in a way, what that means to me essentially is going back to this idea of lateral accountability that I mentioned earlier. Before you can have lateral accountability, you have to sort of be accountable for self. And so I wanted to use this image of somebody looking under the hood being his practice, and coming to terms with what is it that I need to do differently? How do I improve what I do so I can get better outcomes? So there's one piece of the concept that has to do with the individual taking responsibility and holding himself or herself accountable for improving practice. And then the second part of that is really the group, the collective coming together and taking collective responsibility for supporting each other in ways that improve everyone's practice as individuals as well. So I'd like to get you to reflect a little bit about what that might mean for you. And so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about the prompts that you see on this screen. The first of which is, I want you to think of a significant challenge that you are currently facing in your practice. And this is a great time to sort of jot down some of your thoughts on anything you have near you, a tablet, a pad, or even a screen that you may have opened up in your computer. But what's a significant challenge that you're currently facing in your practice? Something that's problematic, hasn't been as effective perhaps as you would like it to be. And then to think about what aspects of your challenge might require changes in your mindset, in the assumptions that perhaps you hold, in some of the strategies you've been trying or using to address it, even in some of the background knowledge that you may need to acquire before you can really move forward towards a solution. And then to think about, okay, so in reality, how safe would I feel sharing it with others in my workplace? How safe would I feel really putting that on the table with others? And then finally, if you did that, if you shared it, how likely is it that you would receive respectful, thoughtful, experience-based, and perhaps most importantly, actionable responses to your challenge? You would receive that kind of feedback. Now, you're not going to have to share this, but I want you to take a couple of minutes and really think about it and jot down anything that you find helpful or useful in thinking about this. And I'm going to ask Debbie to put 2 minutes and remind us when that 2 minute is over.
That's just about 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Megan. Okay, so before we move on, I want you to think about what you just thought about and imagine, consider for a moment, how might a center director respond to those prompts? How might a TA provider that works in your system, in your network, respond to that prompt? You might even want to consider how a practitioner who is serving children at a center on a daily basis, how might they respond to that prompt, to those prompts, rather? And think about how those responses might relate to a quality early care system. And just hold those thoughts as we go through the rest of the presentation. I want you to keep that in mind, both things that you thought about, your own challenge, and how other folks in your system might respond to what's going to follow in the presentation, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and move us to the next slide, which is there because it's sort of like, as the title reads, the evolution of the concept, a practitioner's perspective. This is my perspective. This is how I have experienced this particular work. And on the extreme right, where it says communities of practice, that's where we are right now. That's what we're talking about. And I've included an image of Etienne Wenger's book. I highly recommend it, Cultivating Communities of Practice. Probably some of you on the call have read it. But I want to work backwards from there in terms of my own journey of how I came to understand this work. And so it starts with the work of Peter Senge at MIT and his emphasis on learning organizations. He wrote a seminal book called The Fifth Discipline, and then he followed that with a field book. And as an educator, he followed that book with yet another book titled Schools That Learn, which was a fifth disciplines field book for educators who are interested in thinking of school systems as learning organizations. So that's how I got turned on to the power of this work. I had an opportunity to attend a training that happened in 1995, and it was the result of the Annenberg funds that were provided to help American public schools. And within that organization, within that money, it was basically housed at Brown University. And part of that money was the channel to improve professional development in schools. And that became a department at Brown that was titled the National School Reform Faculty. It was all part of the Annenberg Institute for School Reform, which, as I said, was housed at Brown University. And it basically, I had an opportunity to attend the training in 1995, one of the earliest trainings that was offered as a result of that. And actually, it really blew my mind. I was working at a high school during that time, and I saw the value of schools beginning to organize themselves as communities of practice. In those days, the term that was used was critical friends groups. And critical meant vital. It didn't mean we gathered together to criticize each other's work, but sometimes people thought that was it. But it was we gathered together to talk about what really mattered to us and what was absolutely vital to improving learning. And so one of the elements of that training was that we would use protocols to structure collaboration. So I'm going to leave the presentation and go to my desktop and take you to one of the websites that I'm talking about, the National School Reform Faculty, so you can get a sense, a taste of the amount of tools that are available for folks who want to use those tools to improve the way they collaborate with each other. So bear with me a second. You should see the National School Reform Faculty webpage. I am still a member of that organization, and I'm going to take you to the place on that website that has the listing of these tools that we call protocols. And just to go to the alphabetical listing, just to give you a flavor of the scope of tools that are available for practitioners or leaders or anyone interested in improving the way they collaborate in the workplace. And right now I'm just talking about face-to-face collaboration. If you go to this webpage, and I hope that you do at some point after, you could go down to, I'm going to click on the consultancy, for example, and you'll see that the process comes up on the screen as a downloadable, free of charge, downloadable PDF file. And this is one of those tools that people use, that people can use when they're working as members of a community of practice. It gives you a little bit of the background to it, the sort of rationale for it, and then some tools to help you prepare, to share a dilemma. Remember, Wenger's talking about the challenges that we face being the curriculum of a community of practice. So this is a good way to link that to his theory. And here's the actual tool that you would use if you were going to participate in a consultancy protocol. So there's one example of that. I'm going to take you to another organization that's very much related to the membership of the National School Reform faculty. They call themselves, it was a more recent organization that was created, and hopefully you can see that. I'm going to that website as well. It's called the School Reform Initiative, and I'm going here to show you something very intentionally. They also have the organized set of protocols that people can use, but if you notice down here, there's a folder that says Spanish protocols, right? So these are protocols that are used with Latino communities, folks that speak Spanish who are not yet capable of speaking English fluently and still can engage in the collaborative process. So I'm going to show you, hopefully I can get down to the, you can see the scope even just of translated protocols in Spanish. And we use this in Miami with a lot of the work that we have been doing with practitioners as part of the work that Anna has been doing, partnering with us on. But let me just take you to the same protocol that I took you in the NSRF webpage, and here it is translated to Spanish. So we can work with Spanish populations, and I'm going to let Anna talk very briefly about the demographic sort of composition of the people that we work with. Again, as I said, we work with practitioners, and we work with them, helping them set up communities of practice at their centers. Okay, Anna, you want to make a few comments about that?
Sure. The majority of the practitioners in early childhood education in Miami, based on information that we have from our Quality Counts program, the QRIS here in Miami, the majority have up to 67% of our teachers have less than a high school diploma. 63% have a primary language other than English. So, and we don't really know how many are bilingual, but we know that the majority speak Spanish as their first language, and up to 75% state a country of origin other than the United States. So that just gives you a very brief picture of the level of diversity in terms of culture, race, and education in our early childhood practitioners. Anything else you want me to add, Pete?
No, thank you. Now, one of the things that we are sort of getting ready to do is begin to think about how we can use online communities of practice to continue to not only deliver some of the curriculum training, but also enable our TAs to do follow-up work with folks beyond the training. And we've trained all of the TAs that work with us in Miami as facilitators of communities of practice. But let me pause there and let me give you a peek of another very brief video clip that takes us back to Peter Senge talking about leadership that I think will help apply the concept to a very different way of defining leadership. So let me play that for you really quickly. It's a very short clip.
My favorite definition of leadership is the capacity of a human community to shape its future. The capacity of a human community to shape its future. Now, there's two aspects in that definition that are very useful for me. First is it emphasizes the collective, the human community. A trap we often get into in leadership is it's all about heroes. It's all about individuals, usually great men. You know, if you look at the history of teachers, this great man, that great person, but individuals. But in fact, if you look at what actually gets accomplished, it's always accomplished by collectives. So leadership is a kind of a paradoxical subject where personal growth and development, my capacities as a human being, are very, very important, and it's inherently collective. But the second part of the definition is really the one that I particularly wanted to underline this morning, and that is to shape its future. The capacity of a human community to shape or influence its future. The orientation that I think is fundamental to leadership is what I would like to call for this morning the creative orientation. How we shape our future. How we bring into being things we really care about. How we accomplish things that really matter to us.
Okay, so I'm getting a comment on muting my phone, and I just want folks to know that it is on mute. So I'm getting a little feedback too on my phone and trying to lower the volume to see if that helps. And I'll try something else in the next segment. But anyway, let me go to the next evolution of the concept. Now, so we started with the learning organization. We talked a little bit about the advent of critical friends groups in the 1995, and then along with the emphasis on high-stakes testing came the work of Rick DeFore in professional learning communities. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with that work. And again, the focus that Rick DeFore's work had was in trying to build communities of practice in schools so that teachers would be better able to collaborate with each other to improve learning and student achievement, especially against the requirements of the No Child Left Behind and the emphasis on high-stakes testing that resulted in. So let me play you a brief clip on Rick DeFore's take on the concept, and then I'll come back with you very briefly.
For those who question why we should have professional learning communities, I think the answer is relatively simple. There's never been greater consensus about what it's going to require of educators in order to improve student learning in all of their schools. Virtually all of the leading educational researchers in North America and all of our professional organizations have agreed that our best hope for improving schools is to focus on developing the capacity of the people within the schools. There's just been an international study done by the McKinsey Group by Sir Michael Barber where they looked at the highest performing school systems in all of the world. And they said that the one thing that those systems had in common was an understanding that a system can only be as good as the people within it. And so in those high-performing systems, there was a conscious effort made to develop the capacity of those people to understand that the only way we're going to improve schools is by improving the quality of the instruction that students receive every single day through the collective efforts of their teachers and school leaders. So for those who would ask the question, why PLCs? I would ask, why not? What else is out there that has such universal consensus in terms of its power to make a difference in the lives of students? The biggest obstacles that are interfering with schools moving from traditional schools to professional learning communities aren't really a lack of resources or some of the other external factors that we might point to. The biggest obstacle is overcoming our own traditions and the mythology that persists in education. Mythology that says things like the way to improve schools is by hiring heroic individual teachers who close their door and make a difference in the lives of their students and are sort of indifferent to what else is going on around the school. The mythology that says the real purpose of schooling is merely to give students the opportunity to learn rather to ensure that they learn. So there are some long-standing traditions in American education that we must confront, and we must overcome them if we are going to succeed in becoming professional learning communities and making a difference in the lives of our students. There are now
So coming back now from these two, I want to emphasize a couple of things. The idea of critical friends group, the idea of a professional learning community, and the idea of a learning organization, from my perspective, are all interrelated. There are no, as far as I'm concerned, there are no significant differences between critical friends groups or professional learning communities. They are essentially groups of people that share a practice, and I go back to Wenger's definition. They share practice, they commit to coming together regularly to really work on their practice and to make it better. And if organizations are embedded with groups of people that work like that, they can over time become, I think, what Senge is referring to as a learning organization. So the key elements, again, that are in Wenger's definition, that a community of practice involves a shared domain, an emphasis on practice, on improving practice, and thirdly, a sense of community. These three elements act both as a magnet that brings people into the work, and as the glue that keeps them there. Now, some communities of practice are temporary. They gather for a particular reason and they disband. In other settings, they are permanent, and as long as their collaborative work continues to yield benefits for improving practice, they will stay together for a long time. I'm a member of communities of practice that have been around probably 6 and 7 years, and we're still together. And some of the folks that are part of the NSRF and the School Reform Initiative have been together since probably, for instance, 1995. And pretty much some of the core people are still engaged in that work. And I'm sure some of you are part of organizations that you would define as communities of practice that have a pretty long-standing history of working together. There are a couple of things that I want to emphasize in the concept, one of which is facilitation. So that the image on the left of the person standing in the middle there of the floor and those groups of people working with each other. One of the things, I put that image there very intentionally to make a point, which is, if you notice, the folks around the table are really focused on each other rather than the person standing in front of the room. And so to me, what the point I want to make with that is that communities of practice benefit from having people that are designated and basically commit to being facilitators of the process. And that really shifts a little bit the emphasis from the expert doing the talking to the facilitator helping people create a space, like I said there, and then the screen, creating a space that's safe to talk about the hard things. And I stole, actually, that statement from an ad about Dr. Phil's show, and I thought it applied very, very appropriately to the work of communities of practice. It's a place to come together to talk about difficult stuff. And the second image there is that if it becomes that, then every time you gather as a community of practice, it's always going to be intentional. There's always going to be intentional work to do. There's always going to be work related to what is it that we know about this issue, what do we need to learn about it in order to improve, and how do we go about learning it, right? And when you have somebody that commits to facilitate that process, it has a much greater chance of the work going deep and relevant and continuous a lot quicker. So I just wanted to sort of make those 2 points. They're 2 important considerations when you think about communities of practice. Now, one of the things that enables us to make that work intentional, to make it safe and to make it about practice are the use of protocols. I mentioned these earlier when I took you to the website. What are these things? You know, people always talk about go in the room or going to the meeting and collaborate, and many of us go to meetings that fall very short of collaboration. So we tend to rely on protocols to get to conversations that we seldom get to have as professionals. And so the reason why we
number
can get...
or press number sign to use the directory. Please enter the mailbox number or press number sign to use the directory.
I don't know if you heard that, but I heard a message on my phone. I'm not sure why. I haven't done anything. But anyway, I'll continue. And if anybody needs to give us direction, we'll count on Megan or Debbie to chime in. So as you see on the screen, protocols, the use of protocols, they're tools that give us a set of agreed-upon guidelines to have very, very intentional conversations. As we use them, we actually build skills. And we begin to slowly grow a culture that's actually important to enable us to do this kind of collaborative work. And also, they begin to build trust, so that by using the protocols and applying them to our work, we actually begin to grow the kind of organization that we really want to have if we want to actually take on some of the very complex and difficult challenges that you all are dealing with every day of your life. So I want to focus now on the importance of protocols, because we're going to get to a point where we're going to sort of invite some of you to try something out related to protocols. So again, why use them? They build in safety. They build in equity. In other words, they give people opportunities to talk throughout the process. They promote questioning. They promote reflection. They enable us to tap into multiple perspectives, different perspectives from different practitioners and different kinds of organizations, if those folks are in makeup of the group that we're part of. They breed insights, new insights to old problems that can be really helpful, and they always help us to become better listeners. And essentially, they are the tools that enable us to explicitly define collaboration for those folks that decide to use them. Let me give you some examples of that. Some people talk about using communities of practice. Eventually, people get into what has been termed a protocol pedagogy. This protocol pedagogy essentially can serve many, many different purposes. Let me try to play with a green arrow. Like, for example, there are protocols that enable us to have really focused conversations around texts that are relevant to our work. So in the context of a session, you can structure a conversation around text that's equitable, that's safe, that enables people to question and do all that good stuff. There are protocols that can serve to enable people to really, really analyze and mine successes and pull out those elements that contribute to successes that we could all think about and use. We talked about challenges earlier. Etienne Wenger talked about that. And yes, there are protocols that enable us to seek support around difficult challenges that we're facing. And there are also protocols that are used for practitioners to learn from looking at the work that their kids produce, the actual work, whether it's observation, anecdotals of actual products that the children are producing, and we can look at those together to determine the evidence of learning or the evidence that a child may need support from us that we're not necessarily given to her or to him. When you have these things going on, all of these wheels begin to turn in the middle, as you can see, and that turning of those wheels really represents how a community of practice works. all of these things really are about dialogue, inquiry, and reflection, and I'll show you a little bit more specifically what that looks like in the context of a group. When we're talking about the consultancy protocol per se, what makes it work really, really well is that people bring to the table challenges that are really important, pressing for them at the moment. What you don't want to do is bring something that you've already solved or you have already figured out how to address. So when people bring challenges that they're really struggling with, that's the time where it works the best. You have to believe that a solution is possible, but that you don't know that solution yet. You haven't got it yet, and you're counting on your peers to help you struggle with that and grapple with it and come up with possible solutions. And thirdly, and this is really critical, right? If you have to be willing to change your practice to resolve the dilemma, and here's why. The work that we do often reminds us that we cannot change anyone else. We can only change the way we engage with those folks or the way we address the individuals. And so it's always back to taking personal responsibility for improving and changing your practice. Moving along, I'm just focusing a little bit on one of the protocols as a way to explore the potential and the power of this kind of working together that a community of practice affords us, right? So we talked about dialogue and inquiry. How does that happen, even within the context of one protocol, the consultancy, which is the one we're talking about right now? Well, there are different kinds of questions, for example, that folks learn how to use. The person on the left, right here, let's assume that that person is the one that has brought a dilemma to the group. Well, one of the things that he does is reflect on the dilemma, decide what to share from the dilemma, and also frame a question that enables him or her to have control over the feedback that she is interested in receiving. There are other kinds of questions that happen in that process. They're clarifying questions. These are really helpful because they help people make sure they understand what you're asking them for. And after you've had a chance to explore that a little bit, you get a chance to ask somebody what are called probing questions, and these are actually questions that help them think more expansively about their dilemma. And they might be questions like, oh, why is that so important to you? Or what would it look like if it was done the other way? What are you assuming to be true in this situation? All of those questions are supportive, helping questions that enable the person to really explore their dilemma even deeper. So this is one sort of explicit way that engaging in the work of communities of practice through the use of protocols help to set up dialogue, inquiry, questions, etc. It gets to a point in the process where the folks that are gathered at the meeting, at the session, to support you have a significant amount of information and are ready to sort of talk about it. What's really amazing about this part is that the conversation focuses on the individual's dilemma. Let's assume that this individual right here has just presented the dilemma. They've had a chance to get clarified, and maybe these folks here have asked a couple of probing questions, and now the conversation on the part of these three individuals is focused on this teacher's or this practitioner's dilemma. They, for 10 or 15 minutes, own it. They talk about what would we do if this was our dilemma, and they free that person to listen in on that conversation. They talk about it almost as a piece of text, and the person is sitting there listening to that conversation and pulling out those ideas that she finds most useful and most relevant, most actionable in dealing with the dilemma. So this is a part of the process where the discussion functions as a form of feedback for the person sharing the dilemma. And I'm just walking you through this so you get a sense that in 30 minutes, a community of practice that has been together, maybe not in the very first try, but in 30 minutes you can have a very productive conversation focused on work that's absolutely relevant and vital to, you might say, to child outcomes, depending on who is the presenting, what the topic is that the person is presenting. And if you agree to do it this way, in a 30-minute chunk of time, you could walk away with some very useful ideas to try, and also that the conversation itself has continued to build skills on the part of the participants, and also that over time it shifts the organizational culture, or whether it's a center or a state department or whatever it is that your workplace is about. It has the potential, if done regularly around things that really matter, it has the potential of shifting the organizational culture of the enterprise. So, you know, I've talked about so far basically face-to-face work, and we want to move towards a consideration of how do we make this happen as an online enterprise, as an online community. So, a couple of things, okay, that are very similar to both. In a face-to-face context, there is the essential question of why am I in this group? Why is this important to me? What do I expect to get out of? So that's one of the considerations that needs to happen, and you will notice that on an online context is very similar. Why should I be in this group? What benefits will this group yield for me? And can I really spend the time that I'm committing to? Will it really make a difference? So those two considerations, I think, are similar. Another similarity, even in the face-to-face context, where if you think of protocol as a different way to have a professional conversation, if we're not used to having those conversations, we're going to have to get used to talking that way. So if the protocol is a new kind of technology for conversation, there's this period where we have to be really conscious. We have to be really sort of making sure we're doing it right until it becomes almost second nature. And after a while, the protocol really fades into the background, and what you have is really powerful, supportive conversations. And eventually, when that happens, you're able to integrate those three elements that Etienne Wenger talks about: the practice, the community element, and the domain, which is the thing that brings people together that they have in common. In an online setting, they're very similar issues, but they happen in different ways. For example, there are technological glitches that happen as people try to log in. And for example, we've had some of them here with phones and music and whatnot. And those things we need to sort of work through, okay? Eventually, when you work through those glitches and those issues, that fades into the background, and you are left with integrating. Basically, you begin to integrate those three components that make it almost a seamless process. And I'm going to let Sarah sort of chime in here because she's had a lot of experience watching this process evolve.
Absolutely, and I wanted to add, in addition, before I talk a little bit about the technology, I wanted to say about the consultancy protocol, one of the things I've learned and experienced in doing that particular protocol, but as Pete explained it in such a beautiful way, is that not only does the person presenting the dilemma get a great deal of valuable, actionable feedback in a very relatively short a period of time, and have being willing to share their dilemma and let someone else work on it for a while. It's really empowering. But in addition to that, all the other people who are sitting around having that conversation end up with valuable thinking about their own dilemmas that weren't even talked about directly. And they have the opportunity to gain some insight that they so even though they're working on the presenter's problem, all of them end up with actionable feedback for their own stuff that they can think about how they might use it based on the conversation. So I think that's really fascinating and useful, and it's so hugely productive. In terms of to sort of reference another comment that Pete had said a little while ago, was that in the online environment, some people are really wonderful and excited about sharing their stuff right away, but some people are a lot less willing to, even in the in-person situation, give sort of real stuff, feeling safe enough to tell what's going on and trouble in their projects or their work, in their practice. And I would say that is even heightened in the online environment. Getting to a space of trust is really important, and starting with, challenges or protocols that are relatively simple and that people can feel good about, sort of right away, so that you start to get familiar both with the technology and also with being in an online space so that you can be safe. So that's
Thank you, Sarah. I'm myself dealing with the muting and unmuting button. So yeah, all of these things are real glitches that we end up working through and making. Basically, they become less important as we get into the process. So far, what we've done is given you a little bit of a sense of the concept as we have come to understand it in our work. We talked a little bit of the face-to-face concept applied in Miami with the early learning community that you heard from Anna earlier. We could talk about that for much longer.